sky's not blue.
You need to understand that when the time comes, I'm going to be taking over.
Welcome back to the CultHousePodcast. I am your host, the Scholar of Spite and the Saturday Night Delight, Roger Riddell. Joining me today, he is the frontman for the industrial metal band 3TEETH, Alexis Mincolla. How are you doing today, Lex?
I'm doing great. How you doing, bud?
Pretty good. I hit the Italian flourish on your last name this time.
I like that. That was you threw a little spice on it. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but since the last time we talked, I've immersed myself in the culture. I've played a few Mario games. I've gone to the Olive Garden.
Yeah, the finer points of the culture. I'm glad you're doing it. The fine art, if you will.
So yeah, you guys have a new album coming out here in a few weeks on the 22nd through Century Media, EndEx.
We do. We've been, it feels crazy that's finally coming out just because, man, we've been working on this record started in June of 2020. So 3 years is a long time, which to me, I have this sort of very cathartic feeling about like, just got to get this thing out. Maybe I'll be more excited about it once it's out, but there's something about sitting on music for that long where I've heard every song so much that it's not new to me, but maybe I'll be excited when it's being processed through sort of new ears again through people. So yeah, no, I can't wait for it to be out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of like a common experience for a lot of musicians too, where the bands that weren't broken by the pandemic and just sort of the realities of what came after it, they were really creative during that period, and have been sitting on music that they're just now getting to put out, and maybe not as hyped as they would have been if it had been stuff they just recorded.
Yeah, it's something about like when you make anyone who makes art, you make anything, you're excited about it, you're proud of it, you want to release it to the world. And like it's in that sort of like zeitgeisty moment of it that you're like, oh, like let's see what it does. When you're dealing with like bigger labels too, like the lead times on it, where like even like the record was officially in the can, like masters were finished at the very, end of last year, top of this year. And here we are in September. So like the album has been mastered for 9 months, which is like cool. Like, and then all the lead time to like releasing all the singles, there's something about it that like after a while you're like, all right, let's just fucking release this thing already. Like it's like so much fucking foreplay here. Like I'm just ready for it to be out,
Yeah. I mean, when you've got like a period of time, like a few years that passes between when you initially recorded the album too, do you think some of that has to do to some extent with the way that there are artists, like I've heard Trent Reznor talk about this before, like every album that he's put out is indicative of a specific period in his life. So if he were to make that album that day, it's not the album that he would have made, then.
Yeah, each album is like a diary of my existence during that time. I can hear, songs on a previous album and take me back to a moment that I felt and when we wrote it. So it's like, yeah, I 100% feel that way, which is why like, as we're releasing this album, all I'm thinking about is like other song ideas and new things and like stuff that I'd like to explore now. So it is a little weird where like you have to put all your energy and focus onto a thing that feels, I don't know, a bit regressive. But I guess that's part of an industry thing rather than an art thing. You know what I mean? That you sort of have to like constantly be like looking backwards at something you just did rather than like eyes forward,
Yeah. And I mean, there's also, I guess maybe at times, do you ever feel like there's kind of the thing where it's like, sometimes you read like an old journal and you're kind of like, what was I thinking?
Yeah, no. And I do think that, and there is an interesting thing that happens with the record that I don't want to sort of like discount here, because in the process of writing a record, you're so like, can't see the forest through the trees because you're in the middle of it and you don't know if any of this stuff connects. You're like working on this song, but you're like, does this song have anything to do with the other songs or the album? You're just sort of like creating. And then finally, when you get through the album and it's like mixed and mastered and you figure out like the running order, you do get to like look back on this really weird snapshot of your brain that you go, oh, like I actually like put something together in my head that was so, disconnected that it is weirdly therapeutic to look back on it at that moment. It's just that maybe like a year's worth of time looking back on it, it's a little like, all right, I'm good with looking back on it. But like immediately when it's done, you go, oh wow, like I get it. I get what I was kind of trying to put together here, and it's cool that it all came together. So it's definitely a special thing, but there is a sort of like, ad nauseum that you can only do it so much, especially when people like, make you talk about your songs or what's the song about, or they want you to write a track by track. And you're like, all right, I'm ready to move past these ones.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that too. And it's kind of, kind of along the lines of things that we've talked about in the past where you do enough like interviews with magazines or, music blogs or whatever, and you've probably answered the same boilerplate questions a dozen times by the time you're done with it.
Dude, I did last week. I did. I like to like stack them in sort of time blocks. So like, I did 3 European interviews last week on the same day, all within like half-hour blocks. And I felt like I was going crazy because I was like, did I just said this in the last interview? But like, I don't know, like it was something about it that felt so strange because each person had a slightly different accent, but I felt like I was like deja vuing the whole time. But yeah, no, I mean, again, that's just part of the game, I guess,
Yeah. I've been listening to the new singles a lot, and one of the ones that I keep revisiting is Slum Planet. Not just because of the content of the song, but also because it has this vibe where every time that I listen to it, I'm like, this could have been like the opening theme song for Raw is War.
Totally. Yeah, no, and it did. It's funny. It's like it had like a slightly more commercial sound to it. And so it could totally work for that. Weird fact about that song is Mick Gordon wanted to do an entire drum kit that he created from the sounds of Trash, which is pretty cool. So like that dude's out there like banging lids together and processing it and being like, here's the snare. So it's actually, that was one of those like super nerdy production songs that like that thing just, the mix on that thing just pumps. It sounds so good. But yeah, that was a fun one to write. It was also one that compositionally just it came together so quick. Like, when you're writing a song and you're like, all right, it just like in a day you knock that thing out. I think it was the second song we did on the record. So it was like when we were all like excited and fresh about it,
Yeah. How did y'all get linked up with Mick Gordon? Because I know he's worked on like Doom and Wolfenstein along with working with all these different bands.
It's a funny little piece of COVID serendipity, actually. So when we were on tour actually in Europe in February of 2020, like right as COVID started happening. We didn't really know COVID was happening because you're on tour and you kind of just go, I don't know what this is. This is crazy. Let's just play the next show. And our Milan show was canceled in Italy because obviously there was like ground zero COVID at the time. So we had to take an extra day off in Frankfurt. I had a friend who works at the Bethesda Studios in the Frankfurt office, and we got to go hang out there on our day off and go play the new Doom. And I was talking to her, and I was like, man, the music's so good. And I was like, wouldn't it be so cool if we worked with Mick Gordon or something like that? She's like, I'll give you his email. Just don't tell anyone. And I was like, cool, done. I totally forgot about it. I stored it in my phone. Fast forward to like June of 2020. As we're all holed up out in our place in Joshua Tree, having a couple drinks, making some steaks, we're like referencing something that Mick Gordon did. And like, man, this shit's so dope. Like, what if we worked with him? And I was like, oh yeah, I have his email. And I was like, should I just email him right now? And I was like, fuck it. What's he going to do? Like, say no, or I'm not into it, or not reply. So, we shot our shot and I just sent him an email, and like 20 minutes later, he responded. He was like, so cool to find your name in my inbox. I'm a big fan. Would love to do something with you. So I was like, it's on. So, that's a lesson out there, folks. The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah, no, I think that it's it's a very underappreciated kind of thing that like all you have to do really is just like ask people, and the worst thing that they're ever going to do is say no. Like I a few years ago ran into at a happy hour down in Austin, Texas, DMC from Run DMC, and got his email, and he was like, yeah, I'll do your podcast sometime. And I was just like, I stood there for a minute. I was like, should I go up and talk to him and ask him if he wants to, talk for this, or anything like that? And eventually I was just like, the worst thing he's going to do is just say no, and he'll probably be cool about it, and that'll be that.
Yeah. But at least you won't go, man, I should have done that. So what is that? It's like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So you might as well, shoot that shot.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the law of averages, where I don't know if you ever had a chance to meet Gidget Geen before he died, the original Manson bassist. But I used to talk to him on MySpace back in the day. And I remember one time when I was in college, he told me that basically everything comes down to averages. And if you ask enough people, say you're like trying to get dates or whatever, you talk to 100 girls, like half of them are probably going to want to go out with you. If you ask like 100 people to do like an interview or something, half of them are probably going to be interested.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense. It's probably more of like an 80-20 rule for some things as opposed to 50. I feel like a lot of people are afraid to sort of be annoying, and unfortunately when you are trying to like make something happen and you are trying to sort of like grind it out, like it is you kind of have to be a little annoying, and you have to press people, and funny, like everything feels in many ways like it's a bit of a grind, like nothing's ever going to be easy, and you have to sort of be willing to have those I don't know, like overcome your fear of rejection and failure in particular, especially with any creative project. And I think that goes further than just asking people to do stuff. I think sometimes it's just about asking yourself to do stuff. And I think that sometimes we're afraid to ask ourselves to really do something. So I think that, yeah, there's definitely some good data in there for people. You gotta dig deep,
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of it too is that, there's an element of like tact and being able to read the room that I don't think a lot of people really get when it comes to that stuff too, because like you can kind of immediately tell whether someone's going to be receptive to something if you walk up to them in person.
No, it's very true. It's very true. And I think that reading the room and tact is extremely important for me. Like I fucking hate annoying anyone about anything, or like reminding people. I just hate doing that. It's just like not in my nature. But I think that timing is everything, and like sort of finding that right moment if you do need a favor from someone, or you need to sort of like get up in their headspace about a thing that you need to like to push the project forward. It's like it's all about doing it at the right time, for sure.
Yeah. So on the Mick Gordon thing again, we were talking about how he's done like the soundtracks for Doom, Wolfenstein, etc. I feel like video game music is a really underrated genre, just because like it's really easy to overlook the level of composition that goes into so much of it.
Yeah, I think video games is an artistic medium in general, are kind of slept on by a lot of people. Not gamers. Gamers know, but I think that most people in other artistic spheres really just write off video games as like video games. You hear the word video games, you go, oh, it's just like something like little kids do. But in terms of like the best, writing, some of the best acting, some of the best storytelling, some of the best, musical compositions, like I think that it's a real form of like fine art at this point in terms of creativity that I think a lot of people just are finally coming around to. But yeah, 100% gaming music is awesome, and it's been awesome. It's not like it's just started getting awesome. You listen to like Streets of Rage 2 soundtrack, it's like that shit slaps.
Yeah, I love the Mortal Kombat 3 soundtrack. Like I've gotten that stuck in my head off and on since I was like 8 or 9, and I was actually just listening to it earlier, because there's two different stages. There's the streets and the church, where I get the music from those stuck in my head.
No, it's dope. It's awesome. The new Mortal Kombat looks crazy.
Yeah, I've I've pre-ordered that, and I'm just like kind of anxiously awaiting it for next week because I love every game in that franchise.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's Mortal Kombat, Like I used to go to the mall to play the first one. You know what I mean? I was like, dude, we gotta go play the first Mortal Kombat. Like that was like people would like get in line to play against each other. It's crazy.
Yeah, I about 10 years ago I got to interview Ed Boon and John Tobias, the co-creators.
No way.
And I was telling Ed that I played the first one when I was like 6, and he was
Yeah.
like, "That's frightening, but you seem like you turned out okay."
No, and it's funny because like it was like that was like some of the first like transgressive violence that like went sort of mainstream in video games. Whereas like video games now are so violent comparatively, but like to have to be able to like turn on the blood code was crazy. You know what I mean? It was like, dude, like, do you know the blood code? Which I literally still do. I think it's like up, down, left, right, A, B, select, start, which is like that's how ingrained in our brains it was. But yeah, no, Mortal Kombat rules.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's kind of got that parallel to the music industry where it kicked off the video game equivalent of the PMRC in the 90s.
Yes, definitely. It absolutely did. That was like Tipper Gore and her cronies trying to put parental advisories all over. All it did is make it even cooler. The parental advisory became a brand in of itself that was like celebrated. You know what I mean? It's like I'd be like walking around a record store as a kid, and it's like if it didn't have the parental advisory, I didn't even want it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah, no, like there were artists who started putting the parental advisory on their albums, even if they didn't need it because they knew it was going to move more copies.
well, I mean, there's no regulation to have it now, but like I still see people putting it on records. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it just became iconic.
yeah, it's an iconic badge of culture.
Yeah. And it's like every medium that uh the powers that be decide is going to corrupt the youth get that little thing on it. In the 50s or 60s it was like the Comics Code Authority symbol and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Which is funny because like, you know, counterculture, I think, is like so heavily embraced by institutions now. So it's like doesn't really happen like that as much anymore. So, I think that the lines of transgression were far more clear back in the 90s. Not that I want to get political here, but I feel like, we sort of like knew what we were fighting against then. It was like, um, you know, you knew what didn't like you for having long hair and wearing like a pentagram on a shirt. But like now it's like the whole world is just like doesn't, it's almost like mutation chambered out since then. But yeah, the 90s were a beautiful time.
Oh yeah, now we've got people who want to push morality with an invisible Skyman attached, and people who want to push it without invisible Skyman attached.
Yeah, it's all very confusing. There was a time period where, the Republicans were like the adults in the room, and you were like, they hate you for listening to Rage Against the Machine. Next thing you know, like Rage Against the Machine is like now being used at a MAGA rally, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening anymore. Very
So much of it is like tied to just kind of like the outrage culture of what are we supposed to be angry about today relative to our individual beliefs.
Yeah, there's almost just like nothing left to really transgress. So everything is just like a fucking weird sort of like crocodile tear false outrage. So we can transgress something because I do think it's in human nature to need to transgress stuff. But if there's no transgressive space left, then we're forced to create new space to try and transgress, which is probably not the best place to be. But there might even be a song about that on the record. Called "What's Left," but we'll save that.
Yeah, every time that I see Talking Heads, I kind of just want there to be a show, and I don't know who at like a cable news network I would ever need to like pitch this to, but they should do a show that's called Stay in Your Lane, and they should put shot collars on everyone.
For sure. Just like just Running Man over, redo.
Yeah. Just every time someone says something that's outside their area of expertise, just give them a little zap.
Just blow their head off completely. It sounds like a hit. I think you should hang around
Watch it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you guys were out in the desert for the bulk of the pandemic and the recording process.
I'm still out in the desert right now. Get me out of here, dude.
Yeah. I mean, it's I was thinking about this, the other day, just from our past conversations too, where it's like, what do you think it is about the desert out there, especially, that has drawn so much musical inspiration? Because there's so many bands and musicians and artists over the years from that area that have, just sought inspiration out in the desert and kind of migrated out there, for lack of a better term, from LA proper.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of feelings about this place. I think, the sort of abridged answer to that question is I think there's like a real unique sense of freedom about this place. The idea that it does require just more self-reliance as well. Like there's no like restaurants out here. Like you kind of got to cook for yourself. Like, if anything bad happens, you get bit by a snake when you're out on a hike, you're probably going to die because you're not near anything. No one, people leave you alone. You can get loose out here. You don't even see people for long periods of time. And there's something about that sort of big, sort of giant emptiness that allows like you to sort of like kind of go inward a little bit more. And do a little bit more of that kind of like soul searching. Like it's not overstimulating. I mean, it is very stimulating. It's beautiful. You're like walking down, a trail and like you see like a hawk like swoop a rock squirrel out of nowhere, and then like a coyote runs across, and it's like it's stimulating in a different way. But like, in terms of back in LA and sort of like the visual bombardment of the amount of things to do and stuff like that, here you got to sort of like, create your own moments for you. And I think that, I don't know, there's something about this place that's it's conducive to creating and sort of allowing the space for the ideas. Like it's the least claustrophobic place I've ever been. You know what I mean? So you can literally like see 150 miles in a direction sometimes. And there's something about that I find to just be so, I don't know. It's hard for me to leave. I love it. I've traveled the world, and for some reason coming back to the high desert is like, it feels like it some places drain me. If I'm in LA, I feel like it's draining me, and then I come out here and I feel like this place is like filling me up. So there's something here energetically that I haven't quite put my finger on, but I do think the sense of freedom here is conducive to a lot of creative things. There's nothing really constricting you aside from potentially yourself, which you got to figure out how to get out of your own way out here, which there's a few methods to doing that.
And in places like that, it's kind of like there's not so much of the unnecessary like complexity of everything, and then like I think of the right way to phrase it. I mean, I guess to a sense, what you mentioned about, just you might see a coyote run out in front of you after like a rabbit or something. Just if you get bit by a snake out there, you're just kind of fucked. It's like you're several steps less removed from being part of the food chain. And I think there's something that's like a little bit more exhilarating about that too, because it's a glimpse into the way things work.
And sometimes you feel so removed from everything, you kind of have this sort of like off-world perspective where like, I woke up this morning and like I always take my time and like, do a little walk outside with my coffee and taking some sunlight. And I was just like looking around, and I had like a lot of stuff to do today, which can sometimes be a little stressful when you're like trying to like map out how like your time blocking and everything you have to accomplish. But as I was like looking around, I kept seeing things, and I was just like, all this stuff does not give a fuck about anything that I have to do. You know what I mean? Like, and I took a little bit of like, I don't know, solace in that. There's something about that felt kind of nice. It's just like how unimportant some of my bullshit is. And I think the desert is a great reminder of like how small and unimportant we are at times. So yeah, man, it's a special place. Like I feel like, if anyone is fortunate enough to spend some time out here, they should.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way of putting it, I think, where it's like, now that I'm like thinking about it, humans are kind of like, I guess, the only animal that thinks about becoming one with nature again, and the only way that nature really thinks about us becoming one with it is re-entering the food chain to some
Well,
extent.
yeah, and it's funny too. Like, it's sort of about like how corrupted we are from our own instincts in many respects, where it's like everything out here is very pure in that respect, where it's sort of uncorrupted by the world, where it's like everything else is just so corrupted by, all this sort of like external force that I don't know, at some point it's nice to sort of like return to primal force out here a little bit and just sort of like get connected with some more like, instinctual aspects of ourselves, and stay out camping for 4 days, which will totally shift your fucking headspace by 4 days of not seeing anybody or talking to anyone or anything like that. So, there's something about that. I was joking, I was calling it my feral 40s the other day. I was like, getting back to sort of the basics and, a more stripped down way of life. And, obviously, going back in LA and shooting music videos and, fucking being on the cover of a magazine and all that stuff, like you still have to like check all those boxes for your album release. But I do think it's sort of a good place to check one's ego,
Yeah, and so you were talking about the freedom of being out there, and I know that there's some I guess for lack of a better term, like meditations on freedom in the lyrics of the new album. And I was thinking about this the other day, to the extent that, like, not to get like too philosophical, but to some extent, is there like a point where freedom is basically like an intellectual pursuit? Because essentially, and I've thought about this going back, to when I was in college, where I would just kind of think of it every now and then. Like, some people don't really seem, they like the concept of freedom and the idea of freedom, but they're not suited to not having someone telling them what to do.
Yeah.
They like long for being governed.
Yeah, well, I think that freedom has a scary shadow to it, which not a lot of people like to confront either. The idea of true freedom, of being out there, like, you're 150 miles out in the Mojave on like an overlanding trip, and there's that sense of like, you want to, blow up a refrigerator half naked on LSD. Like, you can do that. No one's going to tell you can't do that. But if something goes wrong out there, like, no one's going to help you. And in fact, if you run out of water, if you run out of gas, like, freedom comes a price of self-reliance. And I think is also a big challenge and a big fear for people. The idea of being able to defend themselves, being able to sort of like, not have to worry about, like, with freedom comes a little bit of chaos. And I think that, confronting the shadow of freedom is something that most people would rather, I guess, trade some of their liberties for safety. And I think that's a reasonable barter for most reasonable people. But I think that that's something that, like, when in the intellectual pursuit of that true essence of the freedom, yeah, you're gonna have some scary moments out there. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna like maybe wish someone could come and help you, and I think that that's something that I've pursued it to sort of see what it's like, and there is moments where you do want to come back and feel a little bit coddled, but I think that that's something worth exploring, because you kind of don't know what it truly means until you really pursue it at its like most raw form.
Yeah. One of the things that always kind of made me think about that was just, I was always a big Hunter Thompson person when I was in high school and college, and part of him living out in the middle of nowhere in Aspen was so that he could have that freedom to like not have people constantly I guess being nosy about whatever it was that he was doing on his property.
And I think he was the kind of guy who was like looking for the edge. Like, he wanted to sort of like see where the edge of like the human psyche could go. And, he always had that saying, like, no one really knows what the edge is, because those who found it went over. You know what I mean? So like this idea that, like, trying to find that edge, that sort of cliff is something that's dangerous, because you can fall off the other side of it. And again, I think that also speaks to a little bit of that sort of like shadow of freedom that we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, one of my other favorite things that he always said was, if you're going to be crazy, you have to get paid for it, or you're going to get locked up.
Absolutely. And you still might get locked up in the process of getting paid for it. So
Yeah.
But also, yes, I'm a huge Hunter fan. I always have been, you know.
It's kind of one of those things too, where the more that that I got into his work, it hits a point where you kind of see where after a period he got lost in the persona that people expected of him, and couldn't really like dial it back from that because he had to be that all the time, and he didn't. I guess there's the line between Hunter the actual person and Hunter the persona got too blurred.
No, and I think that's something that, without the risk of at the risk of turning this into a therapy session, I feel like for me, like that was something that was really happening to me, whether it was like Lex is, this like leather avatar industrial singer versus like, being able to separate myself from like this other aspect of me. And the desert helped me with that, because like, listen, I love getting on stage and putting on all my leather and like being that dude who's like, whatever the 3TEETH singer is supposed to be in people's brains. But carrying a trident, and all that nonsense. But and then like, when you get back to like the basics of like being out in the desert and sort of like reconnecting with who you really are, I think that's important. It's funny. I was watching that Ric Flair documentary, the one on Peacock. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with Ric Flair. Do you know what I mean? Like, they ask him like, who is Richard Lafleur or whatever his actual name is. He's like, I have no idea. Like, he's like, I just became Ric Flair and let that thing just like take over my body, like the fucking, like the Venom symbiote suit. You know what I mean? Like at some point, nothing left to you. So I think that, I do think it is important to not let this sort of like avatar for entertainment completely overtake our identity. You got to have some separation of church and state, to have a sort of a healthier balance in your life. And I think COVID helped me with that, which is a little bit of a silver lining, because the momentum of it, I think, is what kind of pulls you into that at times. You know what I mean? Because you're just like, you don't get to stop. You're just like, you keep doing that. But then like when these moments of sort of like pause happen, you get a little bit more of that time to reflect and go like, what am I doing? Who am I? What's going on? And I think that being able to sort of like pull the symbiote suit off of you a little bit and sort of take a look at it and go, holy shit. That was important for me, I think, which is there's a lot of that in this album, actually.
Yeah.
This album is about sort of death and transformation and sort of new beginnings and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of got that vibe from Drift, especially. I mean, that's a song where every time that I listen to it, I kind of get like that hair standing on end kind of feeling,
Yeah, and that was a really unique thing for us. Like, I didn't really know how people were going to react to it. Completely, pulled back the curtain on that one. Super sort of vulnerable song. The video itself was, this sort of like look at us as like human beings, like, and I think that 3TEETH has always done this sort of like very cold, machined, like completely invulnerable music, you know what I mean? And for us to kind of like get back to this sort of like, me and Chase like with a fucking acoustic guitar by a campfire writing a song, you know what I mean? Like that's not something 3TEETH has ever done before. And I didn't know how people would react to it. And that was a song that was very important to me and sort of how I felt at the time, and a very, I don't even know, it's like a total distillation of how I felt without really sugarcoating it or anything like that. And I think that that was a way of sort of like getting myself through that time, and me wanting to share that and not knowing how people react to it, and then people liking it was a big relief for me. I thought people were gonna be like, this sucks, what are these guys doing?
Yeah, I love how much more organic it sounded than your all's usual stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I think that was something that was by virtue of the environmental influence that this desert had upon us. We had done 3 records in Los Angeles. I don't think we need to do a 3rd record. I think environments deeply inform, our mindsets, the arts that we create, and just generally how we feel. So that was very much so a song about the desert and of the desert,
Yeah. And do you all have any touring plans on the horizon? I know that you all had, gotten out on tour with Cradle of Filth about a year or so ago, and that kind of got derailed.
Yeah, that was a fucking disaster. We all got COVID by the eighth show. And they wouldn't let us tell anyone that we had COVID because Live Nation put like a gag order on us because they didn't want other people to get spooked out about seeing the headlining act. But anyways, I don't want to get into that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, for us, we're sort of still weighing out those options of what next year's going to look like. But there's some announcements coming next week, which I can't really talk about.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to finally getting a chance to see you guys live.
I know it's crazy. It's like we fucking just toured nonstop up until COVID, and then COVID happens, and it's like for some reason you're like, do we want to tour again? Like touring is not like, everything has had an lasting effect on touring, especially for mid-tier acts. Obviously, like, when you're fucking, Beyonce touring in arenas, I'm sure it hasn't had that much of an effect on you. But like as a mid-tier act that sort of like scrapes by on the budgets and stuff like that, gas prices being up, inflation, everything is really tough right now. So it's like we're just trying to make sense of it and make sure that if we go out and tour that we can give the best show possible with the production set up and sort of figuring out what the new thing is going to be that we're going to do. Because I'm just not the type of person that likes to keep doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
But yes, there will be some touring coming.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point too about mid-tier acts versus like a Beyonce or a Taylor Swift or like a Metallica, because they're all like essentially micro economies.
Totally, yeah. They're like their own fucking, their own nation state, fucking Metallica is driving around setting up a Mario Kart fucking map and fucking playing. Which I don't totally get that, but I guess people like that shit,
Yeah. I know, people in some bands who they're like mid-tier, like opening act level, and they're like, yeah, whenever we tour, sometimes depending on the venue we're playing, we have to decide if we even want to sell merch because they take a cut of that now too.
It sucks. Everything
Yeah.
fucks the band so hard. It's like, sometimes I feel like everyone on the tour makes money aside from the band, and the band is just there to sort of like stimulate the rest of the economy around it. But like it just walks away broke and hungover, which you're like, hey, cool. How long can we do this?
You're like the advertisement to get people in the door to the club.
Yeah. The club makes money, the bus driver makes money, the lighting guy makes money, the sound guy makes money, and then like the band, then like afterwards, like, here's your drink tickets, and you're like, ah. But it's tough. It's funny though too, because like, I feel like we're at a stage too where it's like we're getting good streams, like putting on the cover of magazines and shit. And you'd like to think that like that changes anything, but somehow doesn't change that much. So, not that I think that I want to discourage anyone from going out there and pursuing this type of work, but it's tougher than people think.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel maybe a little bit optimistic that there's some more attention being brought to these sorts of things, because maybe eventually someone will decide to say, hey, this needs to be fair. But
yeah, like maybe if like a bunch of people in ski masks like just like took over the Spotify offices and demanded a better royalty rate, a la fucking Airheads fucking movie. But something.
I mean, that's a really good premise for an Airheads reboot.
I know, trust me, I thought about it. I thought about it many times.
Yeah. I mean, people who've had some connections in Hollywood. I know that Adam Jones, and he used to do prop work. I'm still amazed at the stuff that he did on Jurassic Park, and that was so long ago.
That dude's crazy talented. Like everything he does, he's just like got this sort of like insane eye and like work ethic, which definitely goated, highly goated. Love Adam, he's a man.
Yeah. I mean, just like I watched that not that long ago, and so much of that stuff still holds up, and you can't tell the difference between it and something that would be CGI today.
I actually like a lot of it better than the stuff that exists today, to be honest. I feel like a lot of the sort of like CG stuff just looks so whack to me after a while. I'm just like, I don't know. It's also the way it's used is just like, I don't know, feels like filler sometimes as opposed to like the way it was done when it was like analog effects was like very, because there was a much heavier lift to create that stuff, that the scenes were very much so like you know, really built around it, as opposed to just like, yeah, I don't know, it's cheaper. Instead of getting a stunt guy, we can just do him CG and have him do backflips across the screen. You're like, it's like now it's like just a way to do things cheaper, which sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's as much as it's kind of evolved from the time where, even back to like the second Matrix movie, there's that scene where like all the Mr. Smiths are running out onto the playground. But even at that time, I was like, this is kind of like PlayStation graphics.
Totally. It looked so bad.
Yeah.
There was a moment where it looked really bad, where like, I remember watching like, Blade do like a super jump off a thing, and you're like, okay. And then like, it sort of like pulls you out of it. But I think that even where stuff like didn't maybe look real, but if it was like done with like analog effects, like there was still a stylization to it that was just cool. But we're old now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that like either of us are, saying that there's not a craft and an artsmanship to both analog and digital effects. It's more that like a lot of the digital effects now feel like they're just reskinning the same effect.
Totally. Yeah, no, and it also just feels like they're doing them just to save money.
Yeah. It's like the annual Madden installment where it's the same game, but they change the numbers on people's backs.
Exactly. Same engine, different skin.
Yeah. What else is there that you want to put out there?
I don't know, bro. Just fucking go listen to the record or something like that. If you don't, that's okay too. I don't care. No, I'm just excited to finally just be releasing it. Like I said, like there's something about the long road to release that I just find sort of exhausting at times. Like I got to shoot one more music video, and I'm like, damn, I just feel like I've just been doing fucking music videos nonstop. It's always such a heavy lift. But just excited to get it out there, excited to sort of like get some the rest of the music to the fans, and finally like release some merch. I haven't like put any merch out in fucking forever, so we're getting some new merch out, play some shows, see how it feels to get back on stage and sort of dust off the machine a little bit, as it's been a while since whenever that Cradle fucking tour was. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any like specific thing to push or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm stoked on all of that though. Like I want to get some more merch because I've got the one shirt that's the Dale Earnhardt parody. I love that shirt.
I don't even have that one. That one's so that also got canceled because we were supposed to play at Rockville that year, and it got canceled, or maybe we had to cancel it because we had COVID. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, so like that whole thing was supposed to be about the fact that we were supposed to play at Daytona and resurrect Dale Earnhardt, but we didn't get a chance to. Yeah, no, there's a bunch of merch. I literally spent all last week designing cool stuff, and starting to look into getting it produced and timelines and stuff like that. So I'm sure there'll be pre-orders up on stuff soon.
Yeah. I mean, you're isn't your background in design?
It is. Yeah, I sort of like do all the design and do a lot of editing, like edit a lot of the music videos myself. So it's always a lot of work. I don't even know how bands do it without having that shit, to be totally honest. Like, do they pay someone? Because that seems like it would get really expensive. So the fact that we do all that stuff in-house is a bit of a saving grace for us. And also a bit of a fucking hassle because I have to do it all.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's always an extra benefit. Like here in Chicago, my friend Stavros, who used to be vocalist and guitarist for this band, the Atlas Moth, he does a lot of design work for both the bands that he's in and then for a lot of the other local bands. So I feel like it's always really nice to kind of have someone who's local and at the I guess sort of grassroots of everything, in a scene to work on that kind of stuff for you too.
I also think it's interesting when it comes from like a singular vision, which is like, not saying that Tool is a singular vision, but Adam is obviously like, an aesthetic wizard and has a very clear vision of how things are supposed to look. And, you're seeing a lot of those early music videos where like that was his vision and a lot of his execution and stuff like that, which creates such a unique thing. And you can really see when a band has like their sort of like internal singular vision and execution all aligned and stuff like that, because it does create this sort of like really cool like symphony of artistic experience, rather than like sometimes stuff is just like a little disparate, incoherent, and sort of like, oh, it has like this design and then the next thing is that design. It's just like random sort of different people doing stuff. But yeah, I mean, 3TEETH has always sort of been like an art project built on the chassis of a band anyways. So for us, it was like a reason for us to just make stuff, which is why everyone in the band contributes to that, and I was always like, I'll be the eyes, like Xavier like mixed and mastered the first record himself and stuff like that. So everyone's adept at sort of being a part of the machine and sort of making sure that we can do everything in-house ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's like even with a band like Tool, once Maynard started doing like his different side projects, especially like Pussifer, from something like that, you can see where his sort of influences come in. Yeah.
Totally. It's very clear when that started happening, of how much of that stuff was really like Tool was really Adam's brainchild in that respect.
Yeah. I love when a band, you can kind of just see like everyone's individual like personality contributions to it too after a point like that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like over time, especially as like certain people take on side projects or become a little bit more like, I don't know, revealing as like what they're into and stuff like that, I think that it's interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to getting the new album here in a few weeks. I know with Metal War and Shutdown, both of those were they've both been albums that end up in my gym playlist pretty often. And then they're albums that I also, for whatever reason, listened to a lot while I was playing the last Mortal Kombat, because they fit well with the vibe. And they also, I just liked listening to things after a point on that where it's just like, okay, I don't have to listen to the 12-year-old like yelling over the speaker while he's like spamming the same Kung Lao combo. And then just the overall lyrics and vibe of the album too. Like I feel like there's always something thought-provoking for me in like each of those albums.
I appreciate that, man. And I think that there's going to be a lot to chew on the new record. I don't think any two songs sound alike on this album, which is like something we really wanted to do, is to give like each song its own sort of definitive character within the story. And then making sure that you kind of like, it's almost like being on a different planet with every song. They might be in the same solar system, but they don't have anything to do with each other. So I think that it'll be fun to sort of bounce around there. I also think some of the strongest songs on the record weren't singles. Why, I don't know. I think that everyone chimes in on that type of thing. But I think that for me, I usually like the heavier ones, and the heavier ones don't usually work as singles. But I'm definitely excited to see what people think of a few of these songs that are yet to be heard. So cool. Yeah, man. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And, if there's any follow-up stuff you need, you know how to get to me, bro.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again for taking the time to chat today.
Definitely. All right, buddy. I'll check you later.